Hello, my name is Sebastian Chrysophides, and I will be talking about the environmental movement. The environmental movement is critical to the health of not only the US, but the world. But how did it all start? Today, I will teach you how the environmental movement began in the 1960s, reached a peak in the 1970s, and has bounced back very recently. I will talk about key legislation, events, and groups that have made the environmental movement so strong today. So without further ado, the environmental movement. In the fall of 1962, Rachel Carson published her novel titled Silent Spring. Little did she know her Silent Spring would cause an uproar among the environmentally conscious community. Describing the harmful effects that DDT had on her society, Carson aimed to raise awareness for the environment and the health of the United States as a whole, as it enlightened the population that the amount of DDT in the average human's body had tripled since 1950. This was the cause of pesticides being widely used in the food products of the day. This book was the start of a revolution, starting many environmental rights movements, as it was one of the first popularized texts that really called the American people to action in the environment. The two most important categories for the success that these movements brought can be defined as the legislation and the events that it caused. There was clearly a problem with the way that our country was disposing of its waste and in turn, how we were treating the environment. Rivers flowed with trash, and the air was thick with smog, and it was causing increased damage to the American population through means of waterborne illness and lung disease. This population of overpollution was made clear to the majority of the American populace when in June of 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Chicago caught fire and burned as it was so filled with industrial waste and garbage. This led America down the path of creating pieces of legislation to prevent future calamities. The three biggest pieces included the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the creation of the EPA. The Clean Air Act allocated $95 million to the research and to the cleanup of air and water pollution. Being passed in December of 1963, this is the first big step that our nation took towards making ourselves green, as this allowed the federal government to control and regulate air pollution. The next step was the creation of the EPA under Nixon on July 9, 1970. The EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, is a federal agency responsible for the well-being and protection of the environment. The EPA was also incredibly important as it allowed for the environmentally conscious citizens who worked within its ranks to make decisions for the country that would truly benefit the green ideals of the time. Finally, in October of 1972, the Clean Water Act was created in order to oversee and regulate the amount of pollution in America's lakes and rivers. The goal was to eliminate the toxic substances and waste that were plaguing the waters. Again, this gave the federal government control over regulation and the amount of pollution that would be allowed into our waters. All of these legislations were huge successes for the country and the environmental movement as a whole, as they involved the federal government and allowed regulations to be made. Where would the government be without the people, though? Well, the people made an equal stand in their own way with the first ever Earth Day in 1970. According to the official Earth Day website, after the oil spill in Santa Barbara in 1969, an inspiration from student-run environmental movements, Senator Gaylord Nelson served as the first co-chair to Earth Day in an attempt to raise awareness for the air and water pollution of the time. On April 22, 1970, the first Earth Day began, and with it came over 20 million Americans to support the environment and raise awareness for the issues that it faced. This public approach was very important for the time, as it was a unique event that drew a massive following through both the media and public support. In the 1970s, support for the environmental movement had reached its peak, but soon faltered when Reagan came into office, as he cut much funding from environmental organizations. Cuts to the environment took a hard toll, but have recently bounced back with the well-known documentary An Inconvenient Truth, which showed the decimating effects of carbon pollution on our planet's climate. With the support of Al Gore's campaign for political awareness for the environment, this documentary taught many Americans the imminent danger of global warming and climate change, which has become the main focus of many environmental groups today, and for good reason. In large metropolises all over the world, smog hangs in the air and rivers are thick with waste. For example, Beijing has become the center of this topic of air pollution. Environmental groups are inspired by this, however, as they see a world that they can fix. One such modern group includes the kayaktivists. Avid kayakers who see the need to save the environment have been protesting more recently in large waters, with one of their biggest successes in convincing Shell to desist their Arctic drilling endeavors. While the focus has changed since 1970, the environmental movement remains a strong organization that fights for the health of the earth. As Rachel Carson famously put, man's attitude towards nature is today crucially important simply because we have now acquired a fateful power to alter and destroy nature. But man is a part of nature, and his war against nature is inevitably a war against himself. We are challenged as mankind has never been challenged before to prove our maturity and our mastery, not of nature, but of ourselves. I find this quote very important, and I feel like it sums up my presentation, as it really testifies that we have the ability to go in one of two directions. We can either continue with the environmental movement and protect our earth, or we can continue to consume resources unchecked and pollute our waters and just continue to destroy the earth. Thank you.